Welcome to another episode of Digital Painting Outdoors. I'm artist Aaron Rutten, and in this video I'm going to do a painting in a rose garden located in Seattle, Washington near Woodland Park Zoo. This is a view of the location. I was sitting on a bench in the middle of this wrought iron fenced in area, and I decided to do a painting of what was in front of me, which was a distant wall which had some sculpture on it, and then everything else around it was this rose garden. And at this time of year there aren't really any roses there, but there are a lot of nice landscape elements that I decided to paint. So I skipped ahead a little bit and went ahead and did the fence and the bench and the foreground just to make this video a little shorter. And then now what I'm doing is I'm starting on the sky. And for this particular piece, there's so much going on. I really wanted to put in as much detail as I could, but I only had so much time to do it, so I had to kind of jump ahead a little bit. But basically, I'm working between the foreground and the background. Sometimes I'm doing the foreground, sometimes I'm doing the background. The reason why I did the fence first is because it was kind of in the way, and I just wanted to make sure that I got it in place before I worried too much about the background, because some of the background was going to get covered up by the fence. So it was a little tricky. This time I was in the shade enough to where I could see the tablet really well, and there wasn't any glare that really bothered me, so I could see the colors really accurately and I could see exactly what I was drawing. There's just a lot going on in the composition, so that was a little tricky to break it all up into layers. I used a lot of layers here. For instance, I put in the bushes near the bench, and then I put a layer behind that, and I'm going to put some more distant bushes there. I'm trying to vary the color. I'm not really using too many different brushes here. This is just the square chalk brush, and it works really well along with the paper setting to give you a nice leaf texture. So I'm putting in some of those taller bushes or trees, whatever they are there, and just kind of blocking it in based on my sketch. The sketch I made just by kind of tracing over a photo that I snapped really quick, and I don't really want to copy the photo, and I'm not trying to paint the scene exactly. I'm kind of trying to do it impressionistically and just get the overall feel of the scene in the short amount of time that I have. I did this in about an hour or two, I think, and then I took it home and worked on it for about another hour. So overall it was about 2 or 3 hours worth of work. This is sped up about 500%, so it's a time lapse of the painting. And now I'm working on the kind of main focal point of the composition, which is this distant wall, and you probably can't see it in the video, and I really can't show it to you, but it looks kind of Greek or Roman. It has a two-dimensional representation of some people doing something. I'm not really sure what it is, but it's so far away and so small in the composition that all I really had to do was just kind of make a little white thing and put some scribbles on it. It wasn't really supposed to be that detailed. That's the tricky thing about doing these paintings outside, is you have a lot of limitations. When I'm at home and I'm painting, I probably could have done something a lot more accurate looking because I would have had more time to work on it. You know, I could work on it for a few hours, stop, and then come back. But this I was kind of rushed, and I think that's kind of the challenge, is to get the feel of the painting in that limited amount of time. But it was really nice. It was one of the nicer days. The weather was pretty nice today, and it was warm out, and it's kind of interesting being there near the zoo, because it's literally you can leave the garden and you can walk into the zoo, you know, of course if you pay admission, so you can hear all the animals, all the different peacocks and apes and different things making noise while you're painting. But I really recommend checking out tablets for drawing outside. I'm using the Microsoft Surface Pro in this video, and I'm really happy with it. The pen I'm using is a Wacom Bamboo Stylus Feel. It has a really nice rubberized grip, and it feels really nice against the tablet. It feels a lot like drawing naturally on paper with like a felt marker. Here I'm adding some distant trunks. You have to have a good balance of broad detail and fine detail for this painting to work. And so sometimes I'm putting in big broad shapes like these trees here, and then other times I'm putting in little fine twigs and flowers and little things. So there's a good balance of each. And I really am kind of jumping around here and there. It's with a normal painting that I'm doing at home, I would be more analytical about it and have a more of a structure or a hierarchy while I'm painting. But in this case, I was really just trying to kind of do it all on the fly. And so sometimes I'm working on the foreground, sometimes I'm working on the background, sometimes I'm doing highlights, sometimes I'm doing shadows. I'm really just kind of hunting around the landscape with my eye, making observations, and then trying to tie in those observations into the painting. Here I'm going back to the foreground bushes, which I had abandoned for a while. And you'll notice that bench is still red. That was kind of a more complicated object to make, so I think by the time I got done getting the shape of it, I didn't really want to mess with it anymore and color it in. But eventually I will color it in a bench color. I'm doing the foreground stones now, and I'm not going too crazy with my layers or too crazy with my detail. I'm putting in a lot less detail than I normally would, just so that I can get this done in a reasonable amount of time. As I'm doing this, the sun is kind of setting off to my left. It's about 6 or 7 p.m. here, so at some point it starts to get really bright off to my left, and I kind of get blinded a little bit. It's a lot harder to see, and it does change the lighting. And that's one thing to consider. Besides the limitation of time, you can't be outside all day because it'll obviously get dark. Your lighting situation will change, so your light might be way up in the sky if you start painting early, but as it gets later in the day, it starts to move down and everything kind of changes. Sometimes your painting will start out cooler and it'll get warmer. And in this case, that's kind of what happened. It started out kind of cool and kind of neutral, and then as the sun started to set, everything got a lot warmer off to the left. So I tried to remember that because at some point I had to leave and I couldn't really finish the painting there. And as I mentioned, I worked on it a little bit at home. And while I was at home, I tried to remember the overall impression of the piece and how warm it was and added a little bit of warmth. And I'll show you the finished painting once it's done here. So what I'm doing now is I'm blending a lot of the background together, because since I put in such rough blocky colors and I didn't really vary them so much, this blending helps to add more dimension and depth to the color, and it also gives it some focal depth and a more painterly aesthetic. So just doing a lot of blending. At this point, having a lot of different layers isn't going to matter so much. I'll start to condense things down into fewer layers. That way it's easier to blend everything together. I'm adding some details to that wall, just some impressions of things that look kind of like what I see. There's some people standing kind of side by side in the carving that's on that structure there. Adding some more limbs for detail. And again, this isn't exactly the scene that's there. It's not the exact colors and it's not the exact composition, but it's the gist of what's there, and that's Impressionism in a nutshell. You try to get what you can while you can. But it's really, really fun and really relaxing to be painting outside. I spend so much time inside on my computer that it just gets kind of boring, even if I have ideas of things to paint. It's just, I don't know, it's not as captivating sometimes. So I'm going to try to do this a lot more, get some variety. Seattle's a good place to live because there's forests and mountains and beaches, and there's a good variety. So I'll be showing you more of that. I might go on some hikes and go down to the beach and try to get a lot of different perspectives on nature. I'm fixing the bench now and giving it a normal color, and you'll notice that partway through there I kind of decided to hide that fence layer just so I could concentrate more on the background. It helps sometimes to hide layers. I'm just kind of cleaning it up a little bit there, and we're getting kind of near the end of the footage of me painting outside. Unfortunately, my camera ran out of video there, so it'll kind of jump here in a minute to a more full screen view, and you'll be able to see a better view of the screen capture, which continues. So now we're looking at it a little bit closer, and I put the reference image there just as an example, so you can still see what we're kind of going for more or less. And right now I'm going to add some highlights to the fence. Now I'm being kind of sloppy here, primarily because the screen is so small that it's pretty hard to draw super accurately on something this small. I mean, I guess even on my Cintiq it would be hard to draw those highlights pretty straight. And also I kind of want it to look like old wrought iron, so it's okay if they're not absolutely perfect. I do want this to look kind of raw and kind of impressionistic, and I don't want there to be too sharp of details in it. So what I did here is I am blurring the background using the blur brush, and I also used a soften effect. And what that's doing is that's pushing everything that's in the background further back, and it's putting it kind of out of focus. In some ways, the focal point should be the background in the piece, but since I'm sitting so close to the fence, I ended up deciding that I wanted the fence to be more in focus. I could have done it the other way around, but there's just so much going on in the background. It was kind of a way of bringing the background together. So now I'm adding some details to the wall here. I kind of start adding them in, and then I realized midway through that I wasn't really paying attention when I was drawing in the bricks, and I didn't have them in proper perspective. So where the horizon line is, that's eye level, so that grout on the brick should be kind of more level. So I fixed it there and made it much better. I noticed kind of after the fact that I didn't attach the bench to the pillars in the same way that it is in the reference photo, but I just decided that that's okay. I didn't want to, add in way too much detail. You have to kind of decide where to start and where to stop when you're working this way. But overall, I think it looks pretty good. I mean, you really get the impression of it being a garden, and there's a good variety of plants and things, and it isn't an exact duplicate of what I saw, but it definitely makes me feel like I was there, and helps me remember the feeling of being there. That's the important thing in art. I'm just trying to add some little touches of spots here and there to add variety, kind of jumping around, trying to give it a sense of lighting by adding these glows and these highlights on screen layers. And then just kind of evaluating everything, adding some shadows to the foreground, and anywhere else I see that needs to be kind of darkened a little bit. This is kind of the mood lighting part where most of the composition is done, and then this is kind of balancing out the value in the piece, the light and the dark, just to get it to look right. Generally things in the foreground are a bit darker in value than things that are in the background. And in some ways, this lighting's kind of starting to change here as I'm painting. And so where there weren't as strong of shadows on the right, there are now. So I'm kind of trying to indicate that a little bit. I'm kind of shifting the focus of the painting away from being kind of more neutral towards playing off of this lighting that's kind of evolving over to my left as the sun's setting. So this is the finished painting. Again, as I mentioned, I did a little bit of work at home to finish it up. I added some texture and kind of played with the colors a little bit and made it pop a little bit more. But as I mentioned, I'll be doing more of these, so if you found this information helpful, take a quick second to like this video and share it on YouTube or on Facebook, and that'll make it easier for other artists out there to find this information. And stay tuned for more episodes of Digital Painting Outdoors. Thanks for watching.